Okay, students, we're going to continue with this activity for day 18, and we're going to talk about genetics. So if you remember from last time, we've got this scenario where we have Donald, and we gave his wife a name, Irma, and they have the son, Jack, and Jack wants to marry Jill, and Jill's mom is Daisy, but Jill was conceived as an anonymous sperm donation, and Donald used to be a sperm donor, and they're from the same town, and so we've got this issue that Donald might actually be Jill's father as well. And so we're going to figure this out by looking at genetics, right? So we're going to look at different genes that are controlled by one or two, or different traits that are controlled by one or two genes, and we're going to try to figure out if they're related. So this is the table you were given of the different genotypes or phenotypes that Jack collected from his family and from his hopefully future in-law family. And we're going to go through each one. But before we do, I just want to remind you that you learned in the last activity that we have homologous pairs of chromosomes. So what does homologous mean? So you can see here, this is a human karyotype. Karyo meaning nucleus and type meaning picture. So this is a picture of a human nucleus, and you can see that we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. This is a boy. You can see the Y is smaller. And so we have 22 homologous pairs, and then that 23rd sex chromosome pair. So this homolog right here, like this is pair number 13, you get one from each parent. They contain the same genes in the same order, but they can differ in the alleles that they carry. So it might have the gene for eye color, but one is carrying the green allele and one is carrying the blue allele. And so that's a homologous pair. So we're going to use that as we go through the activity today. And so the other thing we're going to use is what we call a pedigree. So this is our fun little scenario that we've got. We're going to represent it using these symbols, and I'm going to show you how to read these symbols. And so if it's a circle, that represents a female, okay? If it's a square, it represents a male. If there's a line between them, it means that they mated. And then anything coming off of that line would be an offspring. So this represents Irma and Donald, and this is their son Jack. And then this would be Daisy and Jill. They want to get married, and we don't know who Jill's father is. So we're going to use this symbolism. The other thing to take note of is these Roman numerals. These indicate generations. So this is the first generation, the parents. This is the second generation, the offspring, and you could go third generation, fourth generation. The other thing we use to label them is we just number the individuals. So this Daisy is number 3 in the first generation, whereas Jill is number 2 in the second generation. And so we'll use these consistently throughout. So you just want to become familiar with these. So let's look at our first gene. We're looking up here at Freckles. Okay, so we have Jack, Jack's mom, Irma, Donald, Jill, and Daisy, and we have what phenotype they're showing. Now, it's typical in a pedigree, if we're going to map Freckles, for instance, in this pedigree, we fill in the individuals where the whatever characteristic you're mapping is present. Okay, so in this case, both Irma and Donald have freckles, but Jack does not. Daisy does not. Jill does not. And so you'd have them filled in, indicating that they're showing whatever trait that is. Now, that doesn't necessarily tell you what their genotype is, but we can figure this out through a process of elimination. So let's start with, we know, or I'm going to tell you, that freckles are complete dominance. It's what we've been seeing so far in our genetics, is that one trait is dominant, one trait is recessive. So if you inherit a dominant trait, it's going to overshadow any other allele that you might inherit. So if you have 2 dominant, you're going to express freckles. If you have a dominant and a recessive, you'll still express freckles. The only way to not have freckles is to get 2 recessive. So that's called complete dominance, or this other word, autosomal. This just indicates that it's not on the sex chromosome. It's on one of the other 22 pairs. So this is complete dominance, and Freckles works this way. So now that we know that, we can fill in quite a bit in the pedigree. So we know if you don't have freckles, you have to be homozygous for that recessive trait. So we say homozygous recessive. So little f, little f. So we know that Jack is little f, Jill is little f, and Daisy is little f, little f. So what do we know then about Jack's parents? If he's little f, but they both have freckles, then obviously they both have to be carrying a recessive allele, but also a dominant allele so that they'll express freckles. So we could fill in our table. We now know what the genotype is of Irma and of Donald and of the rest of them on the tree. And so then the next question is, could Donald be Jill's father, right? So the way we figured that out is we look at, okay, here's our pedigree, right? And we know that Donald is big F, little f. So this is on chromosome 16. It means the two alleles on his two chromosomes, one's a big F and one's a little f. And then on Daisy is little f, little f. So both of her number 16s have a little f on them. And so if we go and we look at what kind of sperm can Donald produce, well, remember, a sperm is going to get one allele of the two. And same thing for the eggs. So we can see that Donald's going to produce a big F or a little f, whereas Daisy's going to produce only little f's. So if this egg and this sperm get together, then we can tell what offspring we'll get. If this egg and this sperm get together, so on and so forth. So we draw these little squares just to organize the crossing of our two eggs and our two sperms. So I don't want you to get confused with that. Sometimes we call them Punnett squares, but sometimes they confuse people because they don't know what they're actually crossing. And all we're doing is crossing the gametes, the generic term for egg and sperm, of both sets of parents. So if we cross those, these are the offspring that we're going to get. So is it possible that Jill is an offspring of Daisy and Donald? Well, certainly it is possible. 50% chance that we could produce an offspring like that. Doesn't mean that he's the dad, but it does mean that it's a possibility. So we need to move on to another gene. Okay? So the next gene we're going to look at, it's a set of genes that controls your blood type. Right? And there's two genes that control blood type. There's the blood antigen type, which is your A, B, or your O. And then there's the blood Rh antigen. Rh stands for the rhesus monkey factor. They found it by studying rhesus monkeys. It's another little, so all of these, A, B, and O, they all represent little proteins that stick off the outside of your red blood cells. So one set of proteins can either be A, B, or O. The other set of proteins control whether you're Rh positive or Rh negative. And so we're going to look a little closer at that. I just drew out both pedigrees. Here's for the ABO blood types. Here's for the Rh factor. So you can see that they express the Rh factor, they express the Rh factor, but Jack does not express the Rh factor. And then these are their blood types for the AB and O. Okay, so we're going to take a closer look though, but first we've got to talk about what kind of inheritance this is, because this is not, the ABO at least is not a complete dominance. The Rh factor is, and we'll talk about that, but this one is unique. Okay, so let's look at these two types of inheritance. So this, in the case when neither allele is dominant, there's two ways this can be expressed. So you can either have both alleles be dominant so that they both show up. So if you have a black mouse that has two black alleles and a white mouse that has two white alleles, the offspring are going to have one black and one white. And so if we show both hairs, we have black hairs and white hairs, that means that both are dominant, and so you get both being expressed in the heterozygote. The different way that this can be expressed is sometimes instead of getting both expressed, you get this blending of the two, and so you actually have individual gray hairs. And really these are all just on the same spectrum. It just depends on how closely you look. Because if you were to look even closer at these gray hairs, they have probably both black and white pigments. But we would call it, when you see in the phenotype a blending, we call it incomplete dominance, that neither allele is dominant. If you see stark, both of them being expressed, we call it codominance, because both of them are dominant. Okay, so if we look at blood type, so like I was saying, and this is, sometimes we express it with an actual, like, it stands for an immunoglobulin. That's what we call these little proteins on the outside. So sometimes scientists will write it as a capital I with the superscript of an A or a B, or you can just write the A and the B, and I'll kind of do both throughout. But if you inherit A's, then you're going to make these A-shaped, whatever the A shape is. I just made it up here. You'll express A-shaped proteins on the outside of your red blood cells. And this is actually what helps your immune system recognize it. It recognizes one type, right? Whatever type you are is what it recognizes. There's a third allele though. So we have the A allele, we have the B allele, and then we have this little I allele. And the little I allele is actually broken. It makes nothing. So if you inherit two little I's, your red blood cells won't make this particular immunoglobulin. They'll be clean, so to speak, and you would be type O blood. But if you inherit even one of the other type, this person's going to be type A blood, right? Even though they have a little I, and this person's going to be type B blood. But notice, if you inherit an A and a B, it's not a blending, it's co-dominant. You'll actually express both A and B, and your immune system will recognize both A and B as self. So if you're a type AB blood, you can receive all the other kinds of blood and your body won't freak out because it recognizes A's and B's, and of course, a clean one doesn't do anything at all. But if you're type O, you don't recognize A or B, so any of these blood types would kill you. Okay, you can only receive O. So O is the universal donor, AB is the universal acceptor. But there's one step further. We also have the rhesus factor that can be either present or absent on the cell. So if you inherit 2 working copies of the gene or a working copy and a mutated copy, you'll still make that Rh factor. So to be the universal donor, really, you have to be O negative. You have to not only not make A and not make B, but you can't make the rhesus factor either. And so the Rh negative people, they have to have 2 broken copies of that gene, so they don't make anything at all. Okay, so this is how blood type works. This is a handy table to have in front of you. And so the Rh factor just behaves like complete dominance, right? You're either dominant recessive is still dominant, and then recessive is how you show the recessive. Okay, so another interesting fact about the Rh factor, this is the only one that crosses the placenta. And so like if you're a mom and you're an O, a type O blood, and you get pregnant with a baby that's like type B, it doesn't bother your immune system. But if you're O negative, if you're any negatives, if you don't make the Rh factor and you get pregnant with a child that has the Rh factor, your body will react to that and try to kill the baby. It usually happens on the second child. And we have a shot that we can give moms that will counteract that. So, and we can talk more about that in class if you have questions. Okay, so going back to Jack and Jill, looking at, let's just do the ABO for now. There's a lot of things we can tell about their genotype. So we know their phenotype. What's their genotype? So the first thing we can tell is that anybody who's type O is going to be little I. So we can label those, right? So if you have Jack that's little I, and both of his parents are A or B, what do we know about their genotypes? Well, we know that they're carrying a little I, right? And same thing with Daisy. Okay, so this is our genotypes for our blood types. Now let's look at the Rh factor. So what do we know? Well, we know that Jack has no Rh factor, so he's got 2 broken copies, which means his parents are both carrying a broken copy and a working copy. But this one's a little bit trickier, right? We know that Daisy has at least 1 working copy and that Jill has at least 1 working copy, but we don't know what the other one is. So we're just going to simply put a question mark because we have no idea. Okay, so now we can do a trickier cross to see if Donald could be Jill's father. Okay, so we're going to look at it this way. So we're going to say, okay, Donald, 2 different chromosomes, right? These are separate genes. They don't have anything to do with each other. So on his number 9 chromosome, he's got a B and an I. On his number 1 chromosome, he has a plus and a minus. And then Daisy also has the same B and I, and then a plus and a who knows what, right? So if we go to look at Donald's sperm, in this case, there's 4 different combinations, right? And so again, we're going to set up this square, but it's just a way to cross the 4 different sperm with the 4 different eggs. So when we go to make a sperm, we've got to grab one of these and one of these, okay? And so these are the possibilities, right? We can grab the B and the plus, we can grab the B and the minus, we can grab the I and the plus, the I and the minus. And same thing with Daisy, and we're just going to keep that question mark in there because we don't know what it is. And then this square just helps you cross them systematically so you get all of the crosses. And so you can see these are all the different crosses we could possibly get out of these 2 parents. And if we were to assign the blood types, this is the blood types that they are. I'll give you just a second to look at that. It's pretty easy, just dominant recessive for the Rh and codominant for the Bs, except we don't have any As, so it doesn't matter. And so the question is, can Jill, who's O positive, come from Daisy and Donald? And it turns out that yes, for sure, maybe even these 2, we don't know what that question mark is. And so, yeah, so we still haven't ruled him out as the dad. We're going to have to go further and look at some other genes. All right, so we'll continue that in the next activity.